Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and it's a great privilege to rise after a couple of great speeches where I watched the members opposite in awe and wishing they were on this side. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I'll just start out by saying, of course, that I will be supporting the budget put forward by the Minister of Finance, and I want to thank the Minister of Finance and all his finance officials and members of Treasury Board. And something that often gets forgotten is the work that is done by the cabinet ministers and the staff in the various cabinet offices in the whole process of bringing a budget together. And I think we should recognize and thank them for all the work they do as well. I want to take a second just to thank my constituents of Kelvington-Wadena. They've been very, very supportive, and they've certainly brought forward lots of their thoughts and ideas over the last couple of years, and I've always appreciated the conversations that I've had. I want to thank my family, of course, for their support, and really appreciate the opportunity to share with them from time to time. And I do want to thank my colleagues, because the last couple of years have been particularly challenging and interesting, and we've been able to work together collectively. I want to particularly in that group thank the class of 16, who I think was an outstanding class. Goes without saying. But I will also add that the class of 20 is pretty good. Right? But the class of 22 is class unto himself. True. Let me be clear at this time, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I want to just say that our hearts, our communities, our businesses, our citizens, and all of our services are behind the people of Ukraine, and we will do all we can to help the Ukrainian people in their time of need. And my constituency has many, many people, many families from the Ukraine, many families with connections in the Ukraine, and we share their concern, we share their wish to be helpful, and we're all very much concerned with what is happening not that far away. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I'm going to talk a little bit about context and from how this budget was put together during a particularly challenging time. And just go back, if you remember, 2 years of global pandemic response to an unknown COVID-19. If we go back 2 years ago, nobody knew what we were getting into. Nobody had any idea what this was going to look like. Of course, the early stages, there was and continues to be job market manipulation by governments through support programs that have kind of been helpful, but have also created some uncertainty in markets. We saw a global decline in tourism that I think has been a significant impact on all of us and a lot of businesses around not only Saskatchewan, Canada, and the world. Obviously, volatility in the markets, both the commodity and stock markets. We've seen the emergence of some really very, very significant and concerning supply chain issues in every segment of the economy. And I think we're going to be struggling with that for some time. And if you remember 2 years ago, about now, there was a hoarding of things like toilet paper and water, and people were stocking up their pantries with dry and canned goods, and essentially, not too far from this date, 2 years ago, the world essentially shut down for a period of time. And if we go back, it was a very, very difficult and unsettling period for all of us. And so now I want to just, for some of us who remember Paul Harvey, and now the rest of the story. So today, Mr. Deputy Speaker, obviously we're dealing with the Russian illegal invasion of the Ukraine. We have international sanctions on the Russian economy and the leadership, the Russian oligarchs, and in particular President Putin. The economy of Russia and the surrounding countries is being severely shaken by the war that is occurring And I think we're going to see residual impact for that for quite some time. And more we're seeing the humanitarian crisis that we should all be very concerned about. And I would argue, and I think it's starting to come out a little bit in media in certain circles, that Russia might in fact be considered a discount warehouse teetering on bankruptcy, with a captured market in parts of Europe for energy and some food products, and other countries are taking advantage of the desperate despot and picking away at the bones, and China may be buying up the shelving and the furniture. The reason I say that, Mr. Deputy Speaker, is China is, and I would encourage my colleagues to read a paper called the Belt and Road Initiative that was put forward by the Center for Economic and Financial Power in 2020 that talks about China's economic impact in the world and things that we should be aware of and concerned with. And in fact, the amount of debt that is owed to China, and the fact that 120 countries have signed Belt and Road initiatives with China, largely on critical infrastructure projects. We should be concerned about China's repeated incursions in the Strait of Taiwan and the build-out in the South China Sea. And the reason that I raise this is that I think that there is a connection, there's a relationship to what's going on in Russia, and I think China obviously is watching this situation unfold very carefully for potential opportunity. Sort of the bigger picture there as well, the Global Infrastructure Outlook, the G20 initiative identifies $94 trillion in global infrastructure demand by 2040. 15 trillion will be unmet by current investment trends. So what we're talking about there in the big picture is that there is incredible opportunity for growth across the world. I think we also have to recognize some of the debt issues that are in place across the world. The global debt to GDP in Japan, 257%. USA is 133%. France is 116%. Canada, 110%. China, 69%. Ukraine, 60%. The interesting one is Russia's debt to GDP ratio is 14.6%. 14.6%. That speaks about some of the relationship that Russia doesn't have with the world. More specific to Canada, the federal provincial net debt per person in Saskatchewan is $44,501. A lot of money. But the reality is that it's the second lowest in Canada. Second only to British Columbia, who is at $43,635, so a close second. And the highest is Newfoundland Labrador at $64,000 per person. And Ontario, interestingly, is at $58,000 per person. The household debt to GDP is double what it was 30 years ago. The 30-year, there's an interesting little aside here that I want to bring to your attention, because I think we're talking about the affordability index and cost of living and so on. Here's a really interesting point. The 30-year mortgage interest rate average in Canada from 1990 to 2022 was 5.8%. Today's short-term rate is 2 to 3%. The Globe and Mail reported that major urban house prices increased 52% in the last 2 years alone. A real estate agent was quoted in the same article as saying, "I'm starting to see offers with financing conditions." Imagine. Historically, financing conditions were part of every offer. How could you go into a market that is doubling or at 52% increase in market value and not be doing any work on the credit worthiness of the buyers? It makes no sense at all. None. I suggest that the problem that we have and the problem that we better face is that currently there is no institutional memory of what normal looks like. We have an entire generation of first-time home buyers that have never experienced a normal cost of mortgage payments. As I said, the 30-year rate from 1990 to 2022 was 5.8%. Look around the room. There's probably, I'm guessing, 6 of us that paid 17% on a mortgage. 17%. In the late 80s and early 90s, there was easy borrowing. Give you an example. I was sent down to Toronto. I was a banker at the time. I was sent down to Toronto to look at why the Toronto market was so heated, and people were investing in real estate, in commercial real estate, strip malls, left, right, and center. And I looked at it and I said, I went down, I reviewed files. Every single file was lending a minimum of $100,000 on a credit bureau. Period. There was no information in the files, no credit information. I dare say we're back at that again. And that should be very, very concerning, and we need to pay attention to that as legislators. There's a number of other things that happened over the last number of years. A lot of us remember Y2K, which we thought the world was going to come to an end, right? 1999, 2000. The subprime mortgage crisis, 2000, 2008, or sorry, between 2007, 2010. You know, in all of that, I think we should be concerned a little bit about the unholy merger of the federal parties, the NDP and the Liberal Party. You know, it's leading us down a socialist path. I think the NDP were lost when the Liberals moved to the left of the NDP in 2015. And it was shocking to them, and I don't think they've been able to find themselves ever since. And I think, you know, I'm just going to read a couple of headlines from last week that I think are particularly interesting. Chris Selly from the National Post called it a very cheap and gullible date. John Robson said it's little more than a congealed fog with a slimy aftertaste. And the Toronto Sun front page called it an axis of weasels. And frankly, colleagues, I, for the life of me, can't understand why the NDP sold their soul. What brought them to that point where they literally sold their soul? For what? For what? There is no gain in it. None. And just finally, on the federal level, the PBO study just, I think, released last week. It's called a distribution analysis of federal carbon pricing under a healthy environment and healthy economy. Under the government's plan, most households in Saskatchewan will see a net loss from carbon pricing. 60% of Saskatchewan households will be worse off. Again, for the life of me, why are the NDP supporting a carbon tax? Why are they supporting the federal Liberal Party? I don't understand for a second. In any event, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I just want to touch on a number of things from the budget. You know, why does all of this background matter if you live in Cheeho or Rose Valley or Kelvington or any of the communities in my constituency? I think it's important to note that we are, as a government, with this budget back on track. We are obviously advocating a stable investment climate, and there's a number of examples that we've been talking about over the last few weeks in the House. The Federated Co-op initiative with AGT Foods for a diesel fuel canola crush plant, I think is very significant. To me in particular, the Jansen Mine project, BHP's project, $12 billion invested. Put that in perspective, our budget this year is $17 billion roughly. $12 billion is being invested by a single company their largest investment in history and their largest investment in potash mining, obviously. I think that's very significant, and 3,500 jobs will be created in construction, and I think that's going to have a significant impact on all of our constituencies in northeast Saskatchewan and east central Saskatchewan. Richardson International is doubling its processing capacity in Yorkton. This is an interesting one. Red Leaf Pulp's wheat straw pulping technology, eventual establishment of Canada's first wheat straw pulp facility in Regina. I think that's a unique and different way of considering value add in agriculture in Saskatchewan. In the north, obviously, Paper Excellence, $550 million pulp mill in Prince Albert. One Skies Mill, $250 million in Prince Albert. $100 million in the expansion of Dunkley Lumber's sawmill in Care River, and on and on and on. And a couple of other things that I think we should pay a lot of attention to, and we do as a government. When we look at agriculture research, we certainly look at companies that are leading in technology advancements like Clean Seed Capital in Saskatoon. And I'm particularly interested in what's happening in the protein market. And we have a company called CMeric that's doing some work in that in the Tisdale area. And I think we're going to see a lot more come out of those kinds of things. So, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I look at Saskatchewan as being a rose amongst thorns. We're back on track with a significantly improved financial picture. I just want to say that we are a very mobile province, from the transportation of raw materials, value-added production and distribution, to our day-to-day travel. We use the infrastructure that we care so much about. Our investment in passing lanes, our investment in the 1,100 kilometers of upgrades of highways this year is pretty significant. The $6.8 billion investment in healthcare funding with 117 new CCA positions, again this year added to the number that we had last year. I think of particular interest, and I have a couple of nieces that are just finishing the nursing programs. The 150 new nurse training seats is of particular significance and importance, and I think will be very much welcomed by the healthcare community. I think the 11 new ICU beds as well is particularly timely. We made a commitment to grow our ICU capacity significantly over the next 3 years, and I think that's going to make a big difference to our population, in particular our middle to senior aged population, who tend to be very reliant on those facilities. I think of significant importance is the addition of $3.5 million in the physician recruitment initiative, the PA Victoria Hospital, the Weyburn Hospital, and more long-term care beds. I also want to mention the new agency to recruit and retain healthcare workers with the 2-year objective of 300 new nurses from the Philippines and a $3.5 million commitment to physician recruitment for new physicians in rural Saskatchewan. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I could go on and on and on about all the great things in the budget, but I do want to highlight a couple more things. The continued $65 million enhanced intersection safety program for highways, $27 million to rural integrated roads for growth. And I'm particularly interested in number 3 west of Prince Albert, number 5 east of Saskatoon, passing lanes, widenings, and safety enhancements along those corridors. The passing lanes between Clavet and Defo will be greatly appreciated by people in my constituency who have to travel to Saskatoon from time to time. And to all of us who come to Regina, the pre-construction planning on Highway number 6, I think twinning of that piece north of Regina will be particularly critical. In my constituency, I do want to say that I want to thank the Minister of Highways for the work done on Highway 38 last year. We're getting Highway 23 done under this budget this year, and some work on Highway 349 that has been long awaited, which connects The budget's all for us. Us. 349, which connects Archibald over to Nacum, which I think is timely and critical as well. Mr. Deputy Speaker, as I said, I could go on and on and on. I have much to say about seniors programs, significant improvement in investment in various seniors programs. I think the particular note is the home care increase for home care services and the high-dose influenza vaccines for those 65 years and older. And as I said earlier, the 117 new CCAs on top of 108 last year will make a significant difference to our long-term care facilities.
Hear, hear.
So again, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I do want to say I will be supporting this budget. I think it's an incredible step forward for our province. As always, this government has always paid attention to the needs of the citizens of Saskatchewan, and I want to say thank you again to the Minister for all the work that they've done, and in particular thanks for the work being done that are going to help the citizens of Kelvington-Wadena to be participants in incredible opportunities in front of us across Saskatchewan. Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker.